Today was one of the last few producer live letters before Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail's release in late June, and we also got the benchmark trailer, which we can take a look at to take some guesses on upcoming abilities in the next expansion. So in this video I'll give you a very quick overview if you don't have the time to watch the entire live letter, and my thoughts on the abilities that we see in the trailer. First of all, they showcase this field on Alpis. On the left side you can see the old grass, and on the right side you can see the new grass. Not only does the grass individually look better, as you can see whenever they zoom in, but the density is also much increased, and that just leads to the entire image looking better overall. You'll also notice that the character running through the grass will now move it, which is a much needed change. Another scene they showed was next to this aetheryte, where the ground is made up of these rocks. You can see they just increased the density of those, added more, improved the textures. All of which I would assume is just possible because of the upgraded graphics engine. Next they showcase some of the effects that water has on the environment, first of all on the character right here. And then they also showed the ground in one of the dungeons, which is much more shiny now, has way more reflections, and I think it just makes the entire scene look much more lively overall. Yoshi P said in the live letter that they've improved and changed the textures for every field in the expansion. However, upon Dawntrail's release, not every single gear piece will be changed yet, and that's mostly down to the sheer number of gear pieces available in the game, as well as the race combinations. They also showed off Ilmec again, where I think you can see the difference in the plants the most. I mean, this entire field just looked okay beforehand, but it looks pretty stunning in the new client. Next up, they showcase some changes to the shadows, as well as new and improved waves, which are not going to be in every location in the game, but I think this is specifically in Dawntrail. Moving on to one of the new zones, that being Tuli Yolal. Yoshi P was somehow very scared of looking up in this scene, and I think the staff was very nervous about him walking around here, so I think there's some environmental spoilers. But in this scene specifically, I think they wanted to showcase the amount of objects that are in the background that we basically haven't seen in any other zone before. Another update that I'm actually quite excited about is the anti-aliasing. Basically, if you run around the game's world, sometimes you'll notice these jagged edges, especially around trees in this game. This is because of the anti-aliasing technology that Final Fantasy XIV has been using until now, which is FFXIV. They now added 2 new rendering options, and they tried to showcase them in the stream, but it's kind of hard to see because the stream quality itself wasn't great. So this is something you should definitely experiment with when the patch comes out. All of these improved graphics obviously come at a cost, so they've increased the minimum demands on your system. And sometime today or tomorrow, depending on when I release this video, there should be a benchmark available which you can run on your PC to see how it handles the new expansion. For PC players, they've also added AMD FSR and NVIDIA DLSS, which is AI-based upscaling of the game. They didn't go with the newest versions of either of those technologies, but either way, it's going to be a good upgrade for some people, especially for those who play on higher resolutions. The PlayStation 4 as well as the Xbox Series S are also included in the update. However, some of the features may just not be available for them, just because the hardware can't handle it. They said in one of the slides that notably the super sampling will be reduced, and they have force-enabled dynamic resolution and LOD, which is low detail models in the distance, to improve the performance on those systems. I think PlayStation 4 was still supported in this update because the PlayStation 5 isn't very popular in Japan from what I've heard, so it makes sense for them to at least support the PlayStation 4 for another expansion or so. I think so far the graphical update is panning out to be pretty much exactly what I expected it would be, where they're just bringing the game up to a higher standard. And especially if they want to support the game for another decade, they'll have some fierce competition in terms of graphics in the next few years. Next up, they showcase some changes to the way the blacklist works. Basically, you now have a blacklist that is server-side and a mute list that is client-side. In addition to that, blacklisting a character will now also blacklist any other characters that this person has on that account. Meaning, if you're being harassed by someone in-game, you can blacklist them and they can't just create another character to get to you again. The blacklisted characters will now also be hidden from your screen entirely, meaning you can't even see them, even if they're trying to interact with you in the game's world. And in addition to that, you also have the estate expulsion feature where you can kick someone out of your house now, which is apparently also available to FCs. You can still end up in a duty with a blacklisted character, and in that case their character model will be shown, basically to not troll the rest of the party, assuming the blacklisted player is a tank and you're a healer and now you can't click on them because you can't see them. That would actually be pretty funny. But basically they said that implementing this blacklist feature to the duty finder would be too much of a technical issue, and they apologized for that. They've also added a term filter which will let you block out specific terms in things that people say, which will only run in say, tell, yell, shout, and emote chat. This could be great, for example, if you don't want to participate in any of the venues that keep getting advertised in shout chat, or if you notice specific terms that RMT bots are using and you want them gone, you can just block the terms that they use right there and it should clear up your chat. Overall, I think these are nice additions. One thing that I would like them to go back to in kind of the same vein is the entire friends list, which takes a long time to load and is honestly just a bit unwieldy. So I do hope that they go back to that in Dawntrail and we get some fixes for that, because using the friends list right now, and honestly for the last 10 years, has been a bit of a hassle. Outside of that, they gave us a bit of a schedule until the launch of Dawntrail. Now this calendar is a bit weird to read. The first day on the top left is April 22nd. So this basically shows 2 months before Dawntrail's release. Do feel free to pause the video if you want to take a closer look at that, because now we'll be moving on to a breakdown of the benchmark trailer and some of the abilities that we can see inside of it. We won't be looking at the entire thing. If you do want to see it, check it out on YouTube, but I'm just going to go over everything that is notable. So in this next scene, we'll be zooming in on some kind of combat scene where different jobs are fighting some of the mobs that we'll be facing in Dawntrail. So right here, we can obviously see Gunbreaker fighting a mobile and then using some kind of new AoE attack. Right before this attack, we can see Fated Circle being used, which is Gunbreaker's AoE powder spender. So in the same way that Burst Strike allows Gunbreaker to cast Hyper Velocity using the Continuation ability, I think we'll also see Wicked Talon being followed up by another Continuation ability. Next up, we can see what appears to be a Dragoon doing sort of an uppercut on the enemy, and it appears to just be straight up Mid-Hog appearing out of nowhere. And I mean, that could be anything. There's really no clues to go off of here, but I think Dragoon fans will be happy either way with that sort of animation. Next, we can see a Sage casting some sort of AoE ability. Now, some people theorize that this could be Sage's basic AoE ability being upgraded, but personally I don't think so, because Sage does an AoE around itself. The one ability that would upgrade like this, in my opinion, is Toxicon, so maybe we'll see an upgraded version of that. Next up, we can see a Black Mage casting some sort of Thunder spell, and this actually looks very similar to Thunder 4, but a bit more chunky, so, you know, maybe it's High Thunder? I think that would track with the recent naming scheme, but who knows, maybe it's an entirely new Thunder spell altogether. Next up, we can see a summoner using what appears to be Fester, but with a new animation. If you compare the current animation to the animation done in the video, I think you'll see that there are some differences there. Unfortunately, I don't think there are any clues towards new summons here, outside of there being a lot of electricity. There is this sort of small lingering orb of electricity as the Fester fades, which to me would indicate a Ramuh summon. But honestly, I'm not too sure about this one. But I'm thinking this could be some sort of upgraded Fester or just a Fester change in general. Now, sneakily behind the summoner using Fester, you can actually see a monk doing some sort of fire dragon uppercut through an enemy. And then it's followed up with another extremely cool looking animation. I especially like these black, almost Pictomancer-like effects that are in the air around the enemy. Now, these could be entirely new abilities, or they could just be upgrades to the basic rotation that Monk already has. I do know that a lot of people think that the Monk kit overall doesn't look as visually impressive as some of the other ones, because it's basically just some guy kicking things. So maybe they've taken the opportunity and reworked some of these abilities entirely, or these are just visual changes. While this is happening, you can actually see the Dancer ability going off in the background. It's these long cuts through the air. And this animation actually lasts for quite a while. It does remind me a little bit of Saber Dance, and the animation that the dance is doing is also pretty similar, but I'm not entirely certain. This next part gets a little bit more tricky to analyze. Basically, the Warrior of Light takes off and lands next to another enemy, and here at first we get a glance at some Paladin changes. The first thing we see is basically the Requiescat animation, however now with an AoE cleave attached to it. So either this is an AoE version of Requiescat in addition to Requiescat, or it's just both single target and AoE in one ability. Next up we can see Red Mage jumping in the air and some sort of thorn appearing around the boss. Some people said that this looks like a whip, but I'm not entirely sure what it's supposed to be honest with you. And I do think this is used sometime during the entire melee combo, because when the camera is panning around right here, we can see this big Z, which appears when the Red Mage casts Zwerchhau, the second melee ability that they have. Next up, we're taking a look at Samurai, but before we actually get to it, there's a chainsaw flying through the air, which will be important in a little bit when we talk about the Machinist. But basically, you can see Samurai using what appears to be, to me, Iki Shoten, which would usually be followed up by the cleave Ogi Namikiri. So right now I'm thinking that this is some upgraded version of Ogi Namikiri, but I'm not entirely certain for a few reasons. First of all, it doesn't look like it's casted in the same way that Ogi Namikiri is. Samurai has this very distinct stance when they cast Midare, Higanbana, and Ogi Namikiri. And secondly, there's no follow-up with Keshi Namikiri, which would be in the current Samurai iteration the natural follow-up to that ability and can only be used right afterwards. So that is a little bit confusing to me right now, but I think it's probable that it's just an upgrade to Ogi Namikiri. Immediately afterwards, we can see the Machinist using some sort of chainsaw. Now, this isn't the chainsaw ability that we already have in the game. We saw that a second ago. It looks entirely different, but this appears to be a different chainsaw ability. So maybe this is some sort of combo finisher, something that only becomes available when you use the first chainsaw ability. Honestly, it could be a number of things, but it is a bit suspicious that this ability is used immediately after the other chainsaw. And it'll be interesting to see whether Drill and Air Anchor also have their own follow-ups. Next up, we can see an Astrologian casting some sort of AoE ability. Now, there isn't really much to go off of here, because this could be a heal, it could be some sort of buff. However, if you take a close look at the animation, I am fairly certain that this is a GCD animation. Basically, if we look at the GCD cast that the job has right now, we can see that whenever we're casting a spell, it does this sort of animation. And whenever we're casting an ability, it does some sort of unique animation. So I think that if it's a spell, meaning it's an ability on the global cooldown, it's very unlikely to be anything but a heal or a barrier. In front of all this, we can see Ninja obviously casting some sort of Hellfrog ability. We do already have Hellfrog Medium in the game, so maybe this is just Hellfrog Chonky. But jokes aside, I do think that this is just another or an upgraded resource spender for Ninja. So here we can see a ton of abilities being used in the background. I don't think we can tell too much off of that, but we do get to see some of the basic Pictomancer abilities here. But for the most part, unless I'm missing something, these just appear to be abilities that we already know. Next, we get to see Pictomancer casting the Mughal Beam. I'm very surprised how well this style actually fits into the game. Then we can see a White Mage casting some sort of GCD ability. I'm using the same reasoning that I used for Astrologian earlier. Basically, this is White Mage's typical GCD animation, and I think every single off GCD has its unique animation. So I'm thinking this is maybe an upgraded Medica 2, or maybe a version of Medica that is somehow influenced by the lilies, which would make sense given all of the flower petals flying around, obviously. Next, we can see Dark Knight swinging its sword around, and this is probably the one that I had the most trouble with because it's very hard to tell what's actually going on, but I do think this is just the basic Dark Knight rotation with some new twist. Next, we can see Scholar applying some sort of effect to the boss. This might just be an upgraded version of their damage buff, which is Chain Stratagem, or this could obviously be something entirely new as well. Next up, we can see a new ability for Reaper, and it does look like the Reaper is coming out of the Communio cast at the end of the Enshroud phase. Just to remind you, Communio is the ability that ends the Enshroud phase as well, but it does appear like the Reaper is still enshrouded and then casts this new ability, so maybe this is another combo finisher. Then we can see some sort of big hitting ability on Bard, but we don't really have anything else to go off of for this one. However, me personally, I think it would make a lot of sense if this was some sort of harder hitting ability and that's just the end of the story. Because when I am playing the current iteration of Bard, I do feel like I'm hitting the opponents with wet noodles. So some harder hitting ability would actually be very welcome. Next up, we can see a new Viper animation, which actually looks really cool too. And finally, as the last job showcase, we can see a warrior here jumping in to save us. and casting what appears to be an upgraded version of Vengeance. This is definitely the Vengeance animation where he takes the axe on his back, but it appears to cast some sort of shield, and the trailer seems to emphasize that the warrior just saved that character. So I'm not entirely sure what to make of this, but I'm fairly certain it has something to do with Vengeance, or perhaps Nascent Flash. But I think we'll find out more about this soon enough, so I'm going to stop speculating now, because this is actually everything that I wanted to talk about today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.